John, I just wanted to make sure you can hear us.
Yes, we can, Carrie.
Great, thank you.
Recording in progress.
All right, it's now 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's public hearing. My name is Frank Cassidy. I'm the acting zoning examiner for the city of Tucson. We have one case scheduled for public hearing tonight. It's TP ENT 0924 00018. Kolb and Irvington PAD, SR to PAD zoning. To avoid unnecessary noise and interruptions, please mute your microphone except when you're speaking. As the zoning examiner, I conduct rezoning hearings on behalf of the mayor and council, and I make findings of fact which I put into a written report along with my recommendation, which I send to the mayor and council for their consideration and for their final decision. My report will be based on the information submitted to me, which includes the rezoning application, the staff report, all the written approvals and protests, all correspondence and testimony given at tonight's public hearing. I will also include in the record all documents submitted to me up to the close of this public hearing. Before we get started, I'd like to put on the record that my son is a colonel in the United States Air Force and is stationed at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. He and his family live on base. Their home is about 2 miles from the subject property. I don't believe that I have a conflict of interest that would keep me from acting as zoning examiner in this case, but I thought that I should place this information into the record as part of my introduction tonight, just in the interest of transparency. Tonight's proceedings are being recorded. When I call on you to testify, please speak clearly and begin your testimony by stating your name and your address. The process after tonight's hearing goes like this. I'll complete a preliminary report within 5 working days after the public hearing is closed. I'll then prepare a final report, which will be issued 2 weeks after the public hearing is closed. If you'd like to receive a copy of the preliminary report and are not listed as a party in the case, you may send an email to tucsonrezoning@tucsonaz.gov or call the City of Tucson Planning and Development Services Department. A copy of the final report will also be available from the Planning and Development Services Department. I will send the final report to the mayor and council. At the scheduled public hearing on this case, the mayor and council will then vote on the matter based on my recommendation, along with other factors. So here's how tonight's hearing will proceed. First, a Planning and Development Services representative will give a brief presentation of the case. I'll then ask the applicant if the applicant would like to make a presentation. After the applicant's presentation, I'll open it up to anyone else in the audience who would like to be heard. And then after all the public testimony, I will again offer the applicant the opportunity to address any points that have been raised and to give a closing statement. I will then close the public hearing. With that out of the way, I'll now ask staff to begin by presenting a brief staff report.
Okay, good evening. I can be heard, right?
I can't hear you.
How about this one? Is this one? Oh, okay. That one works. Apologies. Good evening. I'm Gabriel Slater, lead planner with the entitlement section of City in Tucson. So this is a request by the applicant to rezone approximately 17 acres of land at the northeast corner of Kolb Road and Irvington Roads from Suburban Ranch to pad for the with the goal of developing a mixed-use commercial center with a variety of like commercial uses and grocery and self-storage. And they had a couple of concept land use plans included in the materials. It's consistent with Plan Tucson, the South Pantano Area Plan, and the Groves Neighborhood Plan, which all intersect with the subject site. External reviewers and Davis-Monthan Air Force Base have reviewed it, and the proposed uses are aligned with the restrictions around Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. Staff is supportive of the rezoning request. As of this morning, we have received 1 email in opposition, and then I think 4 letters of support for the proposed rezoning request.
All right. So is that it?
That's it. I think, we'll let Lazarus and Sylvan drive there.
All right. Okay. I guess it would be Ms. Sylvan.
Yes, Mr. Cassidy, can you hear me okay?
I can.
All right, I'm going to share my screen.
I can see it.
All right, perfect. Carrie Sylvan with Lazarus and Sylvan, 5983 East Grant Road. I want to introduce some of the folks in the conference room with me. Charlie Quiros is the owner of the property, longtime Tucsonan, who's here. Jeff Caesar is a consultant to the owner with Arizona Global Technologies LLC. Karen Caesar is our landscape architect from Novak Environmental. Marty Magelli is keeping his germs at home. He is getting over a cold. He is our civil engineer and is on the phone as well. And then Robin Large with my office, who's our land use planner, and you can see her hands because she's off camera. I'm going to go through, I think, a relatively quick presentation, and then obviously I'm happy to answer any questions before and or after the public hearing. So you probably know from the materials where the property is located. It's about 17 acres. It's a very odd shape. At the corner of Irvington and Kolb, you can see Davis-Monthan, the Air Force Base, which is very large, is on 3 of the 4 intersections, with neighbors to the east as well as to the north, and there is a parcel of state land to the north as well. Historically, the property was used as a privately owned aircraft salvage yard. It was cleared of all structures and salvage material around 2010, and it's been vacant for the last 14 years. Kolb Road obviously is to the west. It's about 2,000 linear feet of street frontage. Over on the east is Kinnison Wash, which is about 200 feet in width. With significant, it acts as a significant landscape buffer with mature vegetation in that area. And as I said, to the north, directly to the north is state land with residential further to the north. This is, I mean, you can see it right here. It's an infill property adjacent to the roads and all the infrastructure, water, electric, et cetera. And we think can provide some great commercial opportunities, even with its odd shape. Current zoning on the property is SR Suburban Ranch, which is very low density residential. Just based on the math, it would be 5 residences. I'm not sure you could actually fit 5 residences on there because of the odd shape. I think we can all acknowledge it's not the highest and best use. Even if you were to try and do residential, you would need to rezone for higher density residential. And we'll talk about this in a minute. The Davis-Monthan Overlay District does not allow residential. So as we talk about this vacant piece of property that's sort of stuck in between literally a rock and a hard place in trying to figure out how to bring it forward into the community, that's one of the issues. Staff already noted it's in the Groves Park neighborhood, sub-area 1 of the South Pantano neighborhood plan, which encourages neighborhood type commercial and light industrial on exactly this piece of property. As I said before, due to the proximity of the Davis-Monthan overlay zone, it's in noise control districts A and B. Both of those have prohibited uses, and the #1 prohibited use on the list is residential. So it can't actually be rezoned or used for residential. There are some other preclusions as well, and we have put those into the PAD. So we are abiding by the ADC A and B, the noise control district A and B in our PAD as stated in the PAD. So we chose a PAD and we're basing it on C2 zoning as I think zoning examiner, as I think you're aware, it allows us to create a set of development standards to fit the property and the neighborhood context, focusing on specific types of uses, large and small retailers, restaurants, personal services, employment, light manufacturing, and self-storage. And what was really important for this one is we needed the flexibility to get the zoning entitlements in place, because as you can imagine, in trying to market it right now for commercial, when people look at it and see that it's SR, the commercial users are not going to buy a piece of property that needs to be rezoned. So the idea here was to get it zoned so it's known to be appropriate for commercial, which is again the only use it can really be, and do it in a way where we're creating all of the development parameters that are site specific, and give it over to the owner to market appropriately. In the PAD, we went ahead and created a concept plan, which is sort of our regulatory plan. And then we created 2 ideas of how development could move forward on the site. And we explained this at the neighborhood meeting. It could be a completely different development layout at the end of the day once we market it. But this concept plan with what I'm about to describe right now are the parameters under which it could be developed. So the permitted uses are predominantly the C2 uses, without any of the uses that are prohibited per the overlay zone. It will permit commercial uses like grocery store, retail. We already talked about some of those. It also permits some light manufacturing as accessory uses to those uses. For building setbacks and landscaping on Kolb Road, we have a 15-foot landscape border. The property line is actually already 29 feet from the edge of curb. So there's, when you add the 29 plus the 15, which is about the level of math I can handle, we're at a 44-foot setback with landscaping in that area along Kolb. On the east, what we've done in the PAD is we have a no setback and no landscape border on our property because Kinnison Wash is 200 feet and pretty heavily vegetated. And from I think doing this for a while, that is a really significant landscape buffer. There's also the homes along the backside, and I know we may have one of the neighbors who lives in that area. They have a backyard wall and then average about 30 to 40 feet to the home. So we have proposed no landscaping and no wall back there. We don't think any more landscaping is needed, and I'll come back to the wall when we talk about the neighborhood meeting in just a minute. On the north, adjacent to state land, we have a proposed 10-foot landscape and setback buffer up there. The heights in our PAD are the C2 zoning height, which permits up to 40 feet. However, most of the commercial type uses are usually around 25 feet. We did want to leave it at the 40 feet in particular, and this was discussed at the neighborhood meeting as well. Some of the uses like self-storage, which was actually requested by one of the neighbors in the neighborhood meeting, usually needs that additional height. So we're just defaulting to the C2 40 feet. Access and traffic parking, we're defaulting to the Unified Development Code, so we did not create any new parking regulations in the PAD. There's a potential for 4 access points. You can see them in red along Kolb. 3 of them align with the Kolb Road median cuts that already exist and could permit full turning movements, and we'll be working with Department of Transportation and Mobility once we know the actual uses and can do a traffic impact analysis. One of them, the one closest to Irvington, will be a right in, right out because of its proximity to Irvington. There is sufficient traffic capacity on Kolb for any set of the commercial uses that we'd be looking at on a site of this shape and size. The overlay zone also requires sound attenuation within the buildings, which we have noted in the PAD and we will comply with. There's also a section of the PAD that talks about sustainability measures, things like rainwater collection, low impact development standards, white coat roofs, high efficiency plumbing and lighting, just to name a few. We do have to comply with the Pima County City of Tucson Outdoor Lighting Code, and we wrote that into the PAD as well. And so all of those lighting standards that are required to make sure that light doesn't trespass and that it's downward lit and shielded on all sides are all part of that outdoor lighting code. This just gives you a sense of the 2 illustrative plans. And I realized that in the PowerPoint, we just flipped it on its side. So apologize for the orientation. This is one example that shows a mix of restaurant, commercial, auto services, and this one shows the personal storage and how it could lay out. This is a concept plan that shows a lot of the same kind of restaurant and other uses along the Kolb, and then a potential for a grocer on the site. Again, could lay out differently, but this is all respecting all of the development standards that we put in place. Public outreach, we had our neighborhood meeting on November 12th. We had about 10 neighbors attend as well, and I know Ms. Riley was at that meeting and is here tonight as well. The neighbors were largely supportive. We did hear some concerns and some comments, and I know some of them are outlined in the letter that you received as well with the concerns. The kinds of comments that we heard, just to kind of summarize, questions about the public notification area and requirements. We explained the 400-foot notice area as a state law and City of Tucson requirement. Members of the HOA were at the neighborhood association were there, and they acknowledged that they did get the notice as well as required by city, and that they did push it out to the neighborhood association membership as well, which is part of the reason I think the city notifies the neighborhood association so that there's more notice. But we did comply with state law. There were some questions about the increase in homelessness on the adjacent state land to the north. There were questions about landscape maintenance responsibilities on this site when it's developed to make sure. And there were some questions about the Kinnison Wash landscape maintenance, which is the City of Tucson. And we explained that. The ward office was also there to answer some questions. There was a question about installing a wall on the eastern edge, and we had a good discussion about, like most things in life, there are trade-offs. So there is an opportunity to put a wall there. However, what we've discovered is that when you do a wall and then create pretty mature vegetative area, 200 feet wide, and then another wall, it creates a protected space that a lot of times the unhoused are looking for spaces where it can't be seen, down low, in vegetation to kind of set up camps. Our thought in not putting a wall there is that the buildings will provide sound and noise buffers, and that we'd rather have the ability to see into that area so that we can help monitor if we start to see people coming down maybe from the state land and camping in that area. Our management organization could help have eyes on that area. So that was the thinking behind not putting a wall there. We might have a user that comes in and decides that they would like to do a wall, but a 200-foot natural buffer is a really nice buffer. And again, we thought on the trade-offs that having more eyes in that area made more sense. We talked about traffic along Kolb. Again, there is sufficient capacity. Talked a little bit about drainage. There were some questions and concerns about the blocking the view of Sunset with the property being developed. I think one of the folks in the room who was supportive sort of suggested that if somebody wanted to protect their view, they could have bought the property. That was not our response. It was another owner another property owner. There were a couple of comments appreciating working, the neighbors appreciated working with the property owner. Charlie's been talking to the neighborhood association and the neighbors for a while before we even got this process started. I think has worked really hard to be respectful too of differing opinions, because we know that they are out there, and there is a desire from some folks to just not have anything out there. Again, the only thing it could be is commercial. And then we had a few people voice their desires for Trader Joe's, and somebody voiced a desire for an RV storage facility. I think because they have an RV and where they have to store it is not convenient, so they would like it right there. It was a good meeting. It was an hour and a half, a lot of discussion back and forth, and dialogue, and we appreciated everybody's participation. With that, I am not sure that there is anything that I can add. I am happy to answer any questions now. I'm happy to talk after the public hearing, and obviously we respectfully request your recommendation to approve. And I'm happy to answer questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Sylvan. I'll now go ahead and open it up to comments by the public, and I see that that Lynn Riley is here, and of course, she had submitted a protest letter. Ms. Riley, I did review your protest and all of the other materials for tonight's hearing. You indicated that you would be here, and so if you'd like to speak, why don't you go ahead and unmute and speak at this time?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Like I did email, so you did receive the email. And I do appreciate Charles coming to the meetings and everything, and he did ask us what we might want on that property. And I really don't want anything on the property, but that's me. I don't really want a grocery store. They were saying that there was a 3 mile to get to a grocery store, and there's just 1.5 miles up the street is a Walmart. Okay. I do live at the corner of Goldenrod. So I'm direct, I can see it right there. So my concern is very much is the homeless. We do not have a problem right now. And I don't have a wall. I have a fence that we put up screening, but I can still see through it. And my concern is the homeless coming in, and my son lives in town. He has homeless people that live on and off in an alley. He just witnessed somebody getting pummeled with a pipe, and then he had to put out a fire that was just north of him. The wall was right there, and his neighbor is just full of junk. So that could have been a really dire problem. I understand that there's a homeless issue. I just don't want it in my backyard. And I appreciate when people have to deal with it. I think it's a horrible thing that I think sometimes the homeless get more priority than taxpayers who own a home. And I've been here 30 years. And I have concerns about the traffic because people fly up and down Cole Road. Okay. In the middle of the night, you will hear racing. During the day, people are just flying. And that is a big concern of mine with the intersection right there, because there's been accidents there already. So my concern is traffic and the noise, because there's not going to be, and granted that I think the property would be more to the northwest of me for a big building, but I still have that concern of the noise. We're going to have trucks coming in and out and things like that. And that's a concern for me. You know, I mean, like I said, I've been here 30 years and I love my home, but I just don't, I think, I don't know. I just think it could be something else rather than a supermarket. I don't like that idea.
What you know, from your perspective, Ms. Riley, what would you think would be an appropriate use there?
I don't know, but I really am against this. And I understand that Charles, you know, he bought it. I don't have the problem with, you know, the sunsets and everything. I mean, they're gorgeous, but you could see them. But my concern is the noise, the traffic, and the homeless. And I just strongly believe that intersection, I know there's a cutout to make, if you're going south, that you would have a turn, but I think that's gonna just back up more traffic, because in the mornings when I'm coming home, it's backed up almost to Valencia with traffic. And then when I'm coming home, it's still heavily going north, but it's, going south also. I think it's just a tight area for traffic to be going in and out for entrances. I think it's just, more accidents are gonna occur. And I just want my quality of life to be what I've put, into my property.
Right. All right. Thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak at the public hearing? If so, please use the raise your hand feature or just raise your hand, literally. If you have your video on, I don't see anybody else here other than the team for the applicant, but all right. Ms. Sylvan, did you want to give a closing comment or anything?
Okay, sorry, my mouse was not unmuting. Mr. Cassidy and staff and Lynn and the neighbors, I'm not sure I need, if there's anything that you want me to address. I think we've heard, we had the same discussions at the neighborhood meeting, and I'm happy to step through, but I think I addressed it in the presentation. So unless there's anything that you need, you'd like me to address, I'm good.
Well, I know that at the neighborhood meeting, there was a discussion about possible contamination of the site from the former use. And according to the notes, Ms. Sylvan, your response was along the line of, that Arizona Department of Environmental Quality is already aware of this and addressing it. I didn't really see any discussion in the PAD about, doing any kind of testing out there as development occurs. Are there potential environmental issues associated with the prior use? And if so, how are those being addressed?
Yeah, good question. So actually, when Charlie purchased the property, the ADQ and PDQ were both already aware there was a cleanup that was done of the site. There will need to be, and it's noted at both PDQ and ADQ, that there will need to be some additional work just to make sure everything is clean based on whatever the proposal is. So in other words, depending on what goes there, and if things need to move around, there will need to be, if we're just gonna grade it at a surface level and put something down, there will be less additional work that's required. And our discussions with staff and with the neighbors, those are the regulatory agencies that will, it's not really a zoning issue, it's a separate environmental issue. And we're aware of it. It's recorded against the property. There's a notice that there's that further work needs to happen. So there was no need to put it in any of the zoning documents, but we're aware. And future users will be aware, and we'll work with the two regulatory agencies to make sure we're in compliance.
So you did have one of those regulatory notices recorded against the property then? And
Yes,
so it's your position that really the regulatory process is going to take care of this as you do the individual uses, and there doesn't need to necessarily be a condition placed on the PAD approval or anything to address this. Is that right?
it's a record. It's on the record. It's a recorded. It's one of those recorded disclosures, as you noted. So it's yes.
I've seen those.
I figured you.
And
All right.
yeah, hi, Mr. Cassidy. If there are any site conditions that need to be ameliorated, those things at the time of development package, they're going to have to make any kind of, they have to make sure it's a safe site to develop. So if there's like a brownfield site that's unmitigated or something, like, you know, that would have to be dealt with before they can start getting certificates of occupancy and putting in buildings and everything.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Slater. Did Mr. Quiros, Ms. Caesar or Mr. Caesar have any further comments, or Ms. Sullivan?
Nope.
Thank you, Mr. Cassie. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time. Thank you,
All
everybody.
right, thank you all for your participation tonight. At this point, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing on TPENT 09240018 Kolb and Irvington PAD SR to PAD. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.